Thank you all very much for attending today's installment of the New York iMapInvasives monthly webinar series. My name is Douglas Knopf. I am the Invasive Species Project Specialist for the New York Natural Heritage Program on the Invasive Species Database team. I'm also joined today by Karma Choki, who is going to be monitoring the chat box. She's another member of the IMAP team. If anybody has questions, she'll be able to answer them throughout the webinar. Today's topic is going to be the launching of the 11th annual Invasive Species Mapping Challenge. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. The webinar is being recorded today, and at the end of the webinar there will be an email going out to everyone who has registered or attended. That will include a link to the recording as well as any other resources or links that we go over during the duration of the presentation. If anybody has any questions throughout, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. If Karma is able to get to it, she will answer in the chat, and we'll also have time at the end to discuss any more in-depth questions that people may have. And everyone's microphone is muted throughout the duration of the presentation. And at the end, if anybody has any questions that they want to unmute and ask, just go ahead and put that in the chat and we can unmute you for that. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and jump into it here. So the goal of today's webinar is to learn how to participate in this year's Invasive Species Mapping Challenge, go through our 6 focal invasive species, and learn a little bit of information about how to report your observations and participate in the challenge. So starting out by going through today's agenda, a quick introduction about IMAP and the Natural Heritage Program, and then going through our 3 categories of species: aquatic, forest pest, and terrestrial invasives. For the aquatics, we have flowering rush. For forest pests, we have beech scale and beech leaf disease. And for terrestrial species, we have black jetbead, leafy spurge, and English ivy. After we go through a little bit of identification information for all 6 of the species, as well as some background on this distribution in IMAP already for these species, we'll go through how to interact with the iMapInvasives database, how to report your findings into the database, and then some time for questions at the end. There will also be a brief run through on how to use the iMapInvasives mobile app at the very end, if anybody wants to stick around to learn how to do that. So starting out with the New York Natural Heritage Program. So this is the organization that is facilitated with conserving the biodiversity in New York State by being the data collectors and record keepers for all of New York's rare, threatened, and endangered species and ecosystem type information. And as one of the greatest threats to rare species is the establishment and spread of invasive species, we've also established New York State's official invasive species database program under NYNHP. So iMapInvasives is the database software program that we use to host our database program, where we kind of curate and keep that data repository for all of New York's invasive species data for surveys and management going on throughout the state. And we also manage and produce a host of other data collection and management tools like the Watercraft Inspection Stewardship Program application, as well as a number of derivative analyses and prioritization models based on the data coming into the database. Oops. So before we get too much further, I want to go ahead and establish exactly what an invasive species is, what it is that we're looking for. So invasive species is defined by something that is non-native and negatively impactful in the ecosystem that it is establishing itself in. So an example that most people in New York are familiar with at this point is spotted lanternfly. So coming from outside of the United States, establishing itself in New York, and being negatively impactful to the environment, the economy, and human health. Environment, because it feeds on over 70 native species. Economy, because it likes to feed on agricultural species like apple trees or grapevines. And human health, because it can produce a honeydew that can promote mold growth or attract stinging insects for outdoor areas, which could potentially negatively impact people. So this is just a little visualization of how the data moves in and out of iMapInvasives. So you can think of the database itself as that square in the middle there, kind of that repository where all the data goes to. We're receiving data from a number of different sources, primarily from our partner agencies, so things like the Department of Environmental Conservation, state parks, DOT, and the PRISM network, as well as from community scientists. So community science is a huge component of the work we do. The resources for professionals are always spread very thin, and there's just areas that they are not able to get to, or certain species that they're not able to survey for. So we rely very heavily on our community scientists to help fill in these gaps around the state. And that's a big reason why we do this annual mapping challenge. And we also host a number of different field data collection tools that allow these professionals and community scientists to map out the work that they're doing and report these species that they are coming across. And then from this database, we have a number of derivative analyses and things like web map services where people can have a live view of iMapInvasives data on their own websites, email alerts if people want to know when data is coming in for certain species or certain areas, they can be alerted to that. Reporting tools to make automatic generated reports for things like a species list in a certain park or water body, and then different higher level derivative analyses like prioritization models to show what areas in New York State might be at most vulnerable for the establishment of invasive species, as well as things like our tiers that takes information on all of the different invasives and kind of gives them a ranking on how high of a priority they should be in the state. All this information and more is available at our website at nyiMapInvasives.org. And one thing that I mentioned as one of our partners is the PRISMs. So that stands for Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. And we like to think of these as kind of our boots on the ground counterpart. So while we are managing all of the data that's being collected during surveys and management, the PRISMs are one of the core forces that are out doing those surveys and conducting management for invasive species. These organizations provide information on the best management practices for how to control species that are common in their regions, and they are heavily involved in education and outreach, kind of getting local stakeholders and landowners involved in the fight against invasive species. All of New York State is covered by one of 8 PRISM regions, and you can learn more information at the nyis.info website. You can find resources on how to contact your local PRISM and find out which PRISM you are a member of. But if you're looking to get involved in the invasive species world, doing things like volunteer work, these are good resources to get you started with that. Jumping into what is the mapping challenge. So this is something that's been going on since 2016. And the main reason that we do this is to help fill in the gaps for certain invasive species that we know are in the state, but we don't really have a lot of information on. So it's species that are either recently being designated as invasive or have been known to be invasive for a long time, but just haven't had a lot of survey or attention drawn to them over the years. So it started out just one species, and then over the years we kind of added new ones, swapped them out, and these are the 6 species that we're going to be doing for this year. And again, I want to harp on the importance of community scientists in this mapping challenge. Professionals are out there doing work for the highest priority species, the ones that are posing the greatest risk to the environment or to human health. But there's a lot of species. We track over 600 species in New York in the iMapInvasives database. So there's a lot of species that kind of get left in the leeway. And we want to make sure that we're getting a good idea of the distribution and abundance of all these species the best we can. And of course, the challenge isn't complete without a little bit of incentive. So every year we give out a number of trophies to the highest reporting PRISM regions. So whichever region has the most data coming in will get a trophy related to the species that they have the highest reports for, as well as the top community scientists also receive prizes provided by either DEC or New York Natural Heritage Program. And in the past, we've had a number of different things like conservationist magazines, bookmarks, certificates, boot brushes, little games or prizes, various little things to show our appreciation for community members getting out there and looking for invasive species in their area. So why do we choose the species that we did for this year? We break this down into the 3 main sections of aquatics, forest pests, and terrestrial species. For our 1 aquatic species this year in flowering rush, These usually come recommended to us by aquatic invasive species professionals who are working out in the field and giving us insight into what species they believe might be underreported, that they're seeing often out in the field, but might not necessarily see data for in iMapInvasives. For forest pests, we have beech leaf disease and beech scale. Beech scale is also more commonly referred to as beech bark disease. The beech scale is the insect that's part of the complex that makes up beech bark disease. So beech leaf disease is one that is very high priority throughout the state right now. It's still the subject of a lot of ongoing research to figure out exactly what's causing it to spread, and how we can manage that species as it's making its way through New York State. This information is being very closely monitored. And very recently, beech scale and beech bark disease have been added as a tracked species to iMapInvasives. So despite it being here for a number of decades already, it's only very recently been reportable in IMAP. So we're trying to kind of fill in the gaps for that in hopes of getting a little more data on how the two invasive species are relating to one another. If we're seeing things like higher rates of mortality in beech trees that have beech bark disease and beech leaf disease versus trees that just have one or neither. And then for our terrestrial species of black jetweed, English ivy, and leafy spurge, these are basically just species that we know to be somewhat widespread throughout the state, but we just don't have a lot of data coming in for any of them. They're viewed as kind of a lower priority species. They're not super aggressive or super harmful on their own. So a lot of times they just kind of get overlooked, and other species get prioritized for survey work or management. So we're just looking to fill in the gaps for all of these species and get a more complete view on their general abundance and distribution throughout New York State. And with that, we'll go ahead and jump into a little bit of identification resources for each of the species, starting out with flowering rush. So just for aquatic invasive species in general, and these points kind of pertain to all invasive species, but the main negative componentism is the outcompeting of negative species. For the aquatic specifically, depending on if they are a floating invasive or submerged or growing on the edges of aquatic systems, they're forming these dense monocultures, pushing out native species, shading out species that are in lower strata. So if there's something on the top of the water, species underneath the water aren't going to be able to do as well. These can have changes to hydrology or the flow of water in areas, and can have negative impacts on recreational activity or the ability to have transportation through certain water bodies. So we consider aquatic invasive species to be very important to keep water resources clean and easily navigable. So for flowering rush, Botomus umbellatus, this is a species that can grow either partially submerged in water or sort of right along the banks of water. It likes to have its feet wet. The identification for this species, the leaves are somewhat unassuming on their own, kind of these clusters of these long, slender leaves that are triangular. So rather than having like a flat leaf blade, it's kind of a triangle shape. There'll be a picture here in a second of a cross section that shows it. It has sort of a spongy inside with a lot of air bubbles, which allows it to either float on the surface of the water or stand upright if it's short enough. The roots of the species, like I mentioned, can be submerged or on the water's edge, and it is a rhizomatous species. So one small segment of the roots from this plant can, if you're removing it and you leave a small section in, it can give rise to a new plant, or inversely, if you are moving it, one small section can cause it to establish itself in a new area. And then the flowers of the species are definitely the easiest identification resource for determining whether or not you have flowering rush. These bright, showy pink flowers, so with 3 petals and 3 sepals. So these kind of larger, rounded pink parts are petals, and then the smaller, more triangular parts are sepals. These grow on long stalks in umbels. So while the leaves are usually, 1 to 3 feet long, the flower heads usually extend a little bit past that, so these can be at least 3 feet long. And then you can have 20 to 50 flowers per umbel, and they'll flower at different intervals. So you can see here, there are some flowers that are open right now in this picture, some that are kind of past, and some that haven't opened yet. So it kind of has a longer period of time where it can flower, and typically flowers in July through September. Some other photos here. The top left shows the size of that flower stalk compared to the leaves underneath. And you can see that these plants are growing in sort of shallow water. The picture on the top right here shows the root system. So you kind of have that rhizomatous system where it's crawling along and shooting up new plants as it grows. And then these sort of bulbs here on the end are the bulbils, which can give rise to new plants. And then the bottom picture here is a cross section of the leaf. So it is that triangular shape with the air bubbles throughout. There aren't too many other plants that have leaves like that, so a cross section is a good identification resource, but you should be able to find them with flowers out. The flowers are definitely the best resource for identification. And then finally, we have a distribution map here. So I'm going to be showing distribution maps for each of the 6 species. And just to let you know what you're looking at here, so these hexagons with the little orange circles in them are aggregates of presence data. So the small orange circle indicates 1 to 10 records. The slightly larger one is 10 to 100. And then the larger still, an example over here by Buffalo, is over 100 records, between 100 and 1,000. So there are a few areas in the state where it's known, sort of over in western New York, as well as up along the St. Lawrence River. And then these smaller yellow dots indicate not detected records. So areas where people have gone out, looked for it, and not found it, submitted data for that. So there's a lot of areas in the state where there is just no data at all. There's been no surveys conducted. We're not really sure if it's there or not. And that's the main reason why we're doing this mapping challenge for these species, is to fill in those areas with at least not detected data. And if it is there, finding out how abundant it is. So up next, jumping into the 2 forest pest species of beech leaf disease and beech scale or beech bark disease. So starting off with beech leaf disease. So this was first found in Ohio in 2012 and made its way into New York shortly after. It is caused by a nematode, Littlelanchus crenatae mccannii, which lives in the buds of the American beech trees and will cause damage to the leaves. So when the leaves come out, they will have these kind of dark banding in between the leaf veins. So here's a few examples of light, medium, and heavy symptoms. It could be simple as just a few darkened, thickened areas between the leaf blades, or leaf veins rather. It could be all of them, or in very severe cases, the entire leaf can kind of thicken up, have kind of like a leathery texture to it, and be kind of crispy. And the leaves aren't really able to photosynthesize as well, usually drop off pretty early in the season, and overall kind of decreases the vigor of the trees. This has been shown to lead to tree mortality within just a few years. Smaller trees are usually affected a little bit faster. Research is ongoing into the causes of the spread and how we can prevent it. At this point, the DEC has data for pretty much every county in New York except for 2 in the very northern end of New York. So it is very widespread already. And if you are going to be surveying for this species, the best way to do so is from underneath. So if you're standing underneath a beech tree and looking straight up with kind of the sunlight shining through it, that allows you to see those dark banding between the leaf veins pretty easily. Pictures taken from the top like this aren't really as useful for definitively saying whether it is or is not beech leaf disease. So if you find it, or you think you find it, taking a picture from underneath is the best way to do so. Distribution for this one is a lot better than some of our other species. This has been a very high priority species, so we have a lot of data for it to see where it is, as well as where it isn't with not detected records. But since we're also doing beech bark disease and beech scale, we figured it's good to include this species as well, since if you're already looking at beech trees, might as well look for both. So for beech scale, this is the insect that is the one of the main vectors of beech bark disease. So this is Cryptococcus phagosauga, which is a sap-sucking insect, very similar to like hemlock woolly adelgid, where it will pierce through the bark of a beech tree and suck out the sap. And it is also a vector for a invasive fungus species. So beech bark disease is usually a combination of both that insect and the fungus. So this has been common and present throughout New York State for close to 100 years now. But it's very recently that we added it to the tracked list on iMapInvasives. And now we're trying to kind of get an idea of where it is and more importantly, where it is not. So these photos here are an example of the insect and the fungus. The bottom left picture here shows an infestation of the insect on the bark of the tree. Again, similar to hemlock woolly adelgid, they'll kind of cover themselves in this white woolly substance to protect themselves. And over on the right side here, this isn't a great photo of it, but the fungus kind of manifests as these very small patches of red to a kind of a rusty brown color. You can kind of see a few of them along the furrows here. The fungus is not always present, or at certain times of the year, it might not really be all that vibrant in color, but you might be able to see evidence of old fungus on the bark there. This also affects the texture of the bark, so you can have a smooth-barked beech tree that is covered in aphids, or if it's had it for a very long time and has kind of grown with them, you'll start to see a lot of cracking and fissures in the bark. So this picture over on the right side here shows a tree that's had it for a very long time and kind of looks a little more beat up, a lot more holes in the bark. And you can kind of see along the edges of some of these holes, there's that white fluffy aphid along the living edge of where the tree is still alive, where it's able to feed on the tree. And then just one common lookalike species that I wanted to shout out is the beech blight aphid. This is a aphid that's a little more mobile. It'll kind of be crawling around on branches. But this is I believe it's native species. It's not one that is known to be a high priority or high risk. Doesn't really cause any serious problems in like a stand of beech trees, but it is one that kind of can look similar. And then distribution for this species, as I mentioned, it was just added to our tracked species list, so there's not a lot of information on it so far. Just a few scattered points throughout the state. There's a lot of counties where we don't have any information at all. And there is no not detected information anywhere in the state yet at this point. So that's what we're really looking for. If you find areas where there are beech trees that are healthy and there's no sign of beech bark disease, that's a good thing to record and to put into IMAP. And since these two species, beech leaf disease and beech scale, have a native host, a little bit of identification information for those. So for an American beech tree, you can identify them based on their leaves and their bark primarily. The bark is a very smooth, light gray color. If beech bark disease is present, they might have more of that cracking or fissures in the bark, but for the most part, they're going to be, kind of a perfectly smooth outside. For the leaves, sort of a basic ovate shape. Each of the leaf veins ends in a little serrated tooth along the margin of the leaf. The leaves are pretty smooth and glossy on the top and bottom. They don't have any sort of hair or sandpapery texture. And you typically won't find a single beech tree growing in a forest system. They're very prone to sending up root sprouts. So if you have one tree, you'll usually have a lot of smaller trees kind of around it, especially if the larger tree is affected by like beech bark disease or beech leaf disease. When they're stressed, they'll tend to send up a lot more suckers. So if it's an area where beech bark disease is common, you might find a lot more of those smaller root suckers. All right, and then moving on to our 3 terrestrial species, black jetbead, leafy spurge, and English ivy. So starting off with black jetbead, Rhodotypus scandens. This is a woody, shrubby species. So for identification, the leaves kind of have this doubly serrate look to them. So while each leaf vein does end in a tooth along the margin, there's also additional teeth between those leaf veins. So it's doubly serrate, kind of has a lot of teeth along the margin there. And the leaves are also opposite. So when there's a leaf growing on one side, there'll be a matching leaf growing on the other side of a twig. The leaves have a very light green to almost yellowish color to them, which also helps them stand apart from other shrubs. The twigs on new growth are kind of this same bright green to yellowish color, and then as they mature in the second year growth or older, they'll kind of take on a darker brown color, and they'll have a lot of raised lenticels along the bark as well. So kind of raised up areas, little lines that are kind of like white in color along the bark. The form, again, it's a shrub. It'll grow to about 6 feet tall and kind of grows in tangled piles, or not really like multiple stems coming out of one location, but sort of stems sort of cascading over each other, almost like a multiflora rose, where it's kind of just a tangled mess of these canes. The flowers are white with 4 petals. At this point in the year, there's probably not too many places in the state where it's still in flower. It's probably in fruit in most places. And the fruit is definitely the easiest way to identify the species. So it'll start off in these cluster of 4 fruit that are kind of this green color with these little leaves covering it on the side. And then as the season goes on, the fruit will kind of mature and darken. It'll take on a sort of a reddish amber color and finally turn into a very stark black color. And these fruit can persist throughout the winter and into following seasons. So you may even see a combination of that dark black fruit as well as the green or red fruit on the same plant. So here's an example of that. This picture on the left here has some of previous year's fruit on the shrub while it is still just putting out leaves. And then the picture over on the right side here is towards the end of the season while it's fully leafed out and has mature fruit all over it. And it's a bit hard to see from these photos here. You might be able to kind of get close to your screen here and see the bark here. Again, that kind of brown color with some of those white speckles along the bark for the lenticels. This is commonly found in like forest understories, so it's very shade tolerant. You can find it kind of like trail side or just in forest understory where there's a heavy tree canopy over top. This will be able to survive underneath. And then current distribution, commonly found sort of in the Hudson Valley area, but also in a couple of different spots in Western New York. And as for not detected data, again, not really that much. A couple little clusters, Hudson Valley, Buffalo, but not many other places. All right, moving on to the next species, that's leafy spurge, Euphorbia brigata. So this is a herbaceous species. So it'll be a annual. It'll grow during the growing season and then die off and come back in next years from the seeds that are left in the soil. So the leaves for this species are sort of very long and slender, growing along the stem in kind of opposite, or I think that's supposed to say alternate actually, alternate leaves or sort of whorls that are kind of spiraling their way up the stem. There's some other pictures later on with better view of the leaves. The stem itself, again, it's herbaceous, so it'll stay that light green color. It can get up to 4 feet tall, and if broken, the leaves or the stem will kind of exude this milky white sap, similar to like a milkweed plant. I have read that people with especially sensitive skin might have a bit of a reaction if coming in contact with this. So if you are surveying for it or managing it or you come across it, do take caution with touching the sap there. The flowers on this species are a little bit unique. So rather than having petals or sepals or tepals or anything like that, it has bracts, which are sort of like modified leaves. So the flower is this little thing in the center here, and then these petals on the outside are just modified leaves. And then towards the end of the season, the fruit will be these smooth brown capsules that'll have 3 seeds each on the inside. And then the way that they disperse themselves is after the seeds have fully matured and dried out, the seed pods will actually burst open and fling the seeds, and they can be flung up to, I believe, like 15 feet. So that's how these populations can kind of expand outwards over a number of years. There's a few more pictures here on the top left. So sort of a dense population of them growing along a fence line. Usually it'll be a lot shorter than 4 feet. That's just like the maximum it can grow to. Usually I've seen it between like 1 and 2 feet though. The bottom left picture here is a better look at those leaves. So again, those very long and slender leaves that kind of grow spiraling up the stem. And then the picture over on the right here is of a single individual. You can see how the leaves kind of go up. And it's different from something like flowering rush that just has the flowers at the very top. Leafy spurge has flowers at the top, but also you can see that there are some that are kind of coming out of the leaf axillary. So where the leaf meets the stem, it can have flowers coming out of those areas as well. This species is more commonly found in like open areas or grassy fields, not as shade tolerant. And this is what the data in iMapInvasives looks like right now. So more of an even distribution throughout the state, found in more areas of prism regions for presence data, and then not too much not detected data outside of like the Rochester area. So this has a higher potential for being found pretty much in any part of the state. So it's good to look for it wherever you're located. And then the final species we have on our list here is English ivy. And this is one that I'm sure everybody is familiar with. You know a neighbor who has it planted in a garden or a park where you've seen it growing up trees. Or maybe you've gone to your local Home Depot and you've seen it for sale in the garden center. But it is an invasive species that we do track actively. So for identification, the leaves have 2 distinct forms. The one that is more commonly seen is the immature form, which is sort of that characteristic 3-lobed triangular leaf with sort of a lighter green venation and a very dark green glossy surface. It is a vine, so it does kind of crawl along the ground, or if it finds a vertical surface to start crawling up like a tree or a building, it will kind of put out these small hairs that allow it to latch on to whatever it's growing up. And these are some rather mature vines here that are a couple inches across in diameter. And then as they grow and mature, they will kind of go into a second mature form. So you can kind of see on this picture on the right here, it starts out as this immature vine growing up. And then once it reaches a certain age and has a certain amount of root system established, it will convert into that more mature form. So the shape of the leaves will change from that triangular shape to a more circular or ovate shape. And then it will produce these clusters of yellowish green flowers that will turn into dark blue to black fruit towards the end of the season. Distribution for this species kind of clustered around population centers, so major cities, but also I'm sure most people here can think of, a local park or something that has this growing sort of wild. So for any of these species, but especially for this one because it is a popular ornamental, we aren't looking for data on ornamentally planted species. So if it's, in a pot or in your neighbor's flower bed and kind of kept there, that's not what we're looking for. But if it's growing, again, like in your local park and it's kind of just growing wild through the understory or growing up trees, that's the kind of information we're looking for. So if you see it in those environments, that should be reported. Or if you go out looking for it and you don't find it, not detected points are good as well. This is sort of a more shade tolerant species as well. Can grow pretty well in a forest understory system, as well as climbing up overstory trees. And that is it for our 6 focal species for the challenge. And we'll go a bit into overview of how you can report them to iMapInvasives. So all records that you collect and submit to iMapInvasives for these species during the challenge period, which is basically right now until the end of July 31st, any record you send to iMapInvasives will be automatically counted towards the challenge. We're setting up a dashboard right now that will show all of those records coming in, and that'll be available in early July. But basically, if you see it and you report it, you're in the challenge and it's being reported. As far as like scoring points for the challenge, we like to keep it to unique sites. So, and we categorize that as locations that are more than 100 meters apart from each other. So if you're walking along a trail and there's, English ivy along the whole thing and you want to report it, it's good to take a point every 100 meters or so. You can take more if you want to be more thorough. That's absolutely fine, but you'll only score points for 1 point every 100 meters or so. And as data comes into iMapInvasives, the general flow of how it works is data gets reported, it gets put in, and it gets stored temporarily in this unconfirmed layer, which basically means it's been received, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. Once it's received, an email alert goes out to confirmers. So these are invasive species professionals who have certain permissions that allow them to confirm data. This consists of like people on the IMAP team, people in DEC, state parks, PRISMs, or anybody who is working directly with invasive species and is good with species identification. They'll look at the record, they'll look at the photo, the location, all the information for it, and if it checks out and everything looks good, and the species is confirmable, they will go ahead and confirm it, and then it shows up on the public map as a green dot. This is when things like email alerts go out. So if you have an email alert set up for every time a new leafy spurge point comes in, that's when you would receive those email alerts. It'll go up on that map and show up in those hexagons and those data aggregations. It'll feed into our different analyses and just generally becomes part of the full database. So as for how you can report your findings to iMapInvasives, there's a number of different ways you can do so, and we highly recommend looking at them and going through them, practicing before you go out to do a survey. Make sure you are fully comfortable with whatever method you choose before getting out into the field. There are kind of 2 main components to it. There are more tools available, but these are really the 3 that we would suggest using. IMAP Online, so this is if you're at home, logging onto your computer, and logging into it using a web browser, you can submit data directly through that. So if you take photos on your phone and put them into like Google Photos, and you can pull them up on your computer, and then you can put them into IMAP that way. And then there are offline mobile apps as well. So IMAP mobile app as well as IMAP Survey 1 through 3. These are things that you can download onto your phone, set up ahead of time, and then go out into the field and collect data offline. You don't need to have cell signal or anything like that. So if you're in like a remote area or somewhere in the Adirondacks where you don't get good signal, definitely recommend using one of our mobile tools. It stores all the information on your device until you're able to get back into an area with good service or Wi-Fi signal, and then submit that data from your device into the iMapInvasives database. The one that we most highly suggest using is definitely the mobile app. This is our simplest, most beginner-friendly data collection tool, where basically download the app, you set up an account, which you'll do on a web browser. So you do that on the computer, set up your account, download the app, put in your information, then record the invasive species that you see, store it on your device, and upload the records from your device to the iMapInvasives database. And then just going through these 3 steps for setting up an account, You can do so at our website, iMapInvasives.org. There's a little login button in the top right that will bring you to the either login or account creation page. If you already have an account, you can log in here. If you want to create an account, all you need is a name, an email, password, and jurisdiction, which is the state you're operating in. So for this, it would be New York. After you fill in all that information and hit join, it'll send you an email with a user agreement. You click through it and accept it, and then your account is active and ready to go. And then at that point, you can go back to this page and the top bar there and log in. Once you log in, it puts you directly into the iMapInvasives database where you can see all the information for all the species everywhere. Everything is at your disposal right away. We have several other trainings and resources that go through, how to navigate through the database, filter species, use the different functions. I'll link a few of those in the email that goes out after the presentation. The one thing I want to bring attention to right now is if you want to use the Survey 123 form, which is one of our more advanced data collection tools, you will need your person number, which you can find in your account. And this is basically just a little number that you will type into the Survey 123 tool that will then attribute that data to your account when it goes into IMAP. But if you're just going to be using, online reporting or the mobile app, you don't need to worry about that. It's also highly suggested if you're going to be using one of the offline mobile tools that you practice using it before you get out into the field. So downloading the application ahead of time, going through and practicing how to do it, make sure it's all set up correctly, making sure your login information is properly synced up. And also, like I mentioned, since all of these records are coming in and being confirmed by an expert, photos are very essential to making sure a record is confirmable. So on the left there's a couple examples of Tree of Heaven. So the one on the very left there is kind of blurry. The one on the right is kind of very zoomed out to get the whole tree. Those aren't really good examples of confirmable photos. Really what we need is a in focus and close-up picture that shows enough identifying characteristics that we can say for certain, yes, the photo in this, or the species in this photo rather, is the species that was reported. So for something like, English ivy, if you have 10 acres of English ivy, it's much better to just, take a single leaf and take a picture of that to report it to IMAP, rather than try to capture the entire population in the photo. So the take-home message from all of this is that there are a whole bunch of different species that we track in IMAP, but for this challenge, there's just a small handful of 6 species that we're focusing on for this challenge, and we want you to keep an eye out for. So we encourage you to go out and look for these species wherever you are in the state, whether they are known to occur there or not. If you find it, reporting it with a photo, or if you don't find it, submitting a not detected record. Both of those types of records can be submitted with any of the tools that I mentioned. And then, doing as many surveys as you can, reporting as much as you can, and competing for the first place prize. And then just an extra tip there, practicing using the applications before you go out into the field by doing something like submitting a fake species record. After I wrap up here and we take some questions, I will go through how to do a fake species record using the mobile app. So if you want to learn how to do that, stick around towards the end. And then, like I mentioned earlier as well, we do have a dedicated page on our website for this challenge, iMapInvasives.org/challenge. Since the challenge hasn't technically started yet, that link is not active. You can type that in and go to that page, but there isn't a way to navigate to it on the homepage. Following today's webinar, there will be a banner kind of at the top of iMapInvasives.org that brings you to that challenge page. And then also towards the first week of July, there will also be a dashboard available that will show a distribution of the records coming in for these 6 species, as well as a few charts to show which species have been reported the most, as well as which prisms have been reporting the most data. So you can check in on that throughout the month to see how your area is doing in the challenge. And that brings us to the end of the presentation.